So, all right, we are recording. So hello, everybody. My name is Claire Madden. I'm the TMDL Tracking and Accounting Coordinator for the Clean Water Initiative program in Vermont DEC. So part of my role is working with the Watershed Planning Program on managing the data around clean water projects happening all throughout the state and using that data to prepare reports to the state legislature and to the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. So that's my role here, and I'm joined by Marie Caduto, who's one of our watershed planners. Marie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Marie Caduto. I'm the watershed planner that I cover the southeastern portion of Vermont. So glad you're all joining us on this.
Righty. And it looks like we have a great group of people here today because we're recording, and so that everybody can hear. If you're not speaking, I would just ask that people mute their microphone to avoid background noises and the like. Okay, before we get into a demonstration of the new project form, which I'm sure is the main reason everybody's here today, I just wanted to provide a little bit of background on the Watershed Projects database, which is a database that we use to manage clean water project data, and why we're moving to using ANR online forms to assist with data management for the Watershed Projects database. So we use the Watershed Projects database, or I'll refer to it as WPD. We use the database, both the Watershed Planning Program and the Clean Water Initiative Program at DEC use WPD to track clean water projects from the point of identification all the way through implementation. And projects can be identified in a lot of different ways, but often they are identified as part of the tactical basin planning process through an assessment or planning phase project, like a stormwater master plan or river corridor plan, but may be identified in another way as well. And we want to capture those projects in our database to be able to track project opportunities and direct funding opportunities to support clean water work. We're moving to the use of the ANR online forms as a way for project proponents to submit project information for review and inclusion in the Watershed Projects database, because up until now, the role of adding newly identified clean water projects to our database has fallen primarily on the watershed planners, of which there are only 5 for the whole state, and it's a lot of manual data entry. So for all of our wonderful partners who know about these projects, we've created these forms as a way for project information to be entered and then just reviewed and approved by the watershed planners and flow directly into the database. So it will hopefully streamline the process, minimize duplicative data entry, and make everybody's life easier. That's the goal. But of course, learning a new system is a little bit of work up front, so that's part of the reason we have the training today. We're also shifting to the funding programs that we offer to support clean water work are shifting. A lot of them are shifting to more of a block grant structure, where we have partners as grant administrators, and sub-grantees may need to enter or update project information in our database. And we wanted to provide a mechanism for those folks to be able to add or update information in our database. So I'm just going to go through a couple of quick demonstrations of tools that we have available that allow users to view the projects that are in the Watershed Projects database. It's a really important first step when thinking about a project and considering submitting a form for the project to be included in our database, that you first check that we don't already have a record of that project in our database. We have a lot of projects already identified, and so we want to make sure to avoid duplication in our database and any source of confusion around, the same project being represented a couple different ways because it was entered more than once. So the first of those tools is the Clean Water Project Explorer, which let me just share my screen here. Okay. The Clean Water Project Explorer, which I'll include a link in the meeting chat. This is available through the Clean Water portal on DEC's website, the Clean Water Project Explorer here. This shows more projects than just what we have recorded in WPD. We also display projects that are reported to us by our reporting partners. So other state agencies also fund clean water work and report back to us. And those projects will also appear in this Clean Water Project Explorer tool. But it's one way to check what projects are already in our database records for a particular area. Because there's so much data behind this tool, it's really good to filter and refine the search as much as possible so that you get a manageable amount of returns on your search. The first way to do that is by filtering for either potential projects, which are projects that have been proposed but have not yet been funded, projects in progress, which would show you projects that have received funding and are kind of, work is underway, and then completed projects would be projects that have finished out and been closed out. So that's one way to filter. You can also search by keyword, select a sector that your project fits within, and select the type of project, and then select location information. So maybe I'm considering a river project in Franklin County, and I want to see what other projects are already there. If I just search based on this criteria, I'm going to get a lot of results, I think. So you can see each of these map points represents one or more projects that we already have in our database that have been proposed. But one important thing to note is that the map points that show up on this search are just the projects that we have a latitude and longitude point associated with, and not all of the projects in our database have been assigned a specific latitude, longitude. Some are sort of in a planning phase where we know generally the area, but not the specific site yet. So it's really important to also check through this list of projects to see those projects that aren't appearing as map points. Additionally, one map point may represent more than one project. So if a project has a design phase and an implementation phase, and they have the same latitude and longitude, that would show up as sort of stacked map points in a single site. So you can see here, this allows you to scroll through multiple different projects that have the same latitude and longitude. So a couple of things to keep in mind. In order to get maybe more refined results, you can select by a smaller geographic area. So maybe instead of searching the whole county, I'm just gonna look at river projects in Swanton. So then fewer projects appear, but again, there's several projects in our database that just have not yet been assigned a specific map point. So good to check through those. The other tool that you could use for looking at project data in our databases is the Watershed Project Database Search tool. This does not display data in a geographic format. You'll just get sort of a table or a list of projects searching this way. So a different way to look at the data and the Clean Water Project records that we have. This will work best if you have a project in mind, say you know that a design phase of a project has been completed, and you know the watershed project's ID number that was assigned to that design phase project. And now you're thinking it's time to move to implementation. You're not sure if the implementation phase of the project has been recorded in the watershed project database yet. You could search for the design phase project by the WPD ID number. So let's say we're talking here about project ID 8737. If you search, that was a stormwater final design project, and you can see this project has been completed, but you can also go to the project details and see if there's a follow-on phase of the project that's been recorded in the database. So here you can see the implementation phase of this project with a completed design has already been recorded in our database and has a status of proposed, meaning that project is just awaiting funding. So that one would not require a new submission for the project because it's already in our database. If there was no project that showed up in this related projects table here, then you would know, okay, I need to submit the implementation phase for this project as a new project form so that it's recorded in the database and I can move on to the next step. So once you've confirmed whether or not the project that you have in mind is or is not in the database, if it's not in the database, you can move on to the form, which is we'll be demonstrating in just a minute. Before we get there, the form is available through ANR Online, which is an online portal that the Agency of Natural Resources uses for a lot of different types of reporting and information collection. If it's your first time using ANR Online, then you'll need to set up a user account. The instructions for how to do that are right here, and it's pretty straightforward, but if you have any issues, there's also support information for using ANR Online available here. In terms of preparing a submission, the next step sort of depends on the project. If you have a very straightforward project that you know all of the information for and are able to pretty seamlessly fill out all the fields in the form, it's a kind of a no conflict type of project that is simple, then you can go ahead and fill out a form submission, and the watershed planner that's reviewing that submission will reach out to you if there's any points to clarify or any additional information needed. On the other hand, some projects can be pretty complex and might be worth having a conversation with the watershed planner for that region before submitting the new project form, particularly if there's any question around how to characterize the project, like what project type would be most representative for the project, if there's any sort of questions around natural resource issues that might come up as a result of moving forward with the project. It's good to just have a conversation with the watershed planner and touch base before submitting the new project form. In general, just try and use your best judgment around whether it would be helpful to have a discussion with a watershed planner to kind of clarify any project intent or details around the project before submitting the form. Like I said, the planners will definitely reach out if there's anything that they see in the form that raises a question or requires more information. So you can count on that as well. With that, I think I will turn it over to Marie for a demonstration of the form.
Great, thanks, Claire. I'm gonna pop into my screen. Hopefully this will share all right. So here you go. So once you're logged in and you get to the new project form, which you might have to search for a little bit if you already have an account and you're doing invoices and stuff through end form. You just look for the new project form, and you should get to this particular page. So it's going to come up with a blank form for you and ask you to answer the question that Claire just went through, which is it in the database? And as long as you say no, you can go ahead and continue. The first thing I want to point out, though, is that when you're scrolling through this screen, you'll see these little blue buttons that say information. So if you have any question at all on what you're supposed to put in that particular box, this says confirm the project is not already recorded in the database by following the steps outlined in the instructions panel. So, take a look if you have any, misunderstanding or you don't really know what's being asked, just click on these little blue buttons. Otherwise, the instructions are already right here for you. So you can always just look at it if if it's the first couple of times you're doing this, just run through these. And so we know we've already checked through what Claire said that this is not in the database yet. And it gives you a link right to the Project Explorer, so you can look at that. And the project screening tool, which we're going to get to in a little while. So the first question is, does this treat a water quality problem? Obviously, any of the clean water projects we're doing have to treat some form of water quality issue. And this one is asking if it's already been assessed through a basin plan, a stormwater master plan, a road erosion inventory, any of the above. So if it's already come out of one of those, you want to click yes, and we'll get into more detail on that. If it hasn't been, it's going to open up some other questions, which is what water quality problem will this address? So is it, and again, use the little information buttons to say what's going on. Is it an eroding gully, or is it a stabilization project? All of these. So if you say yes to that, you are treating one of these water quality projects. And then it's always going to ask you, have you done that screening tool to see if there are any natural resource conflicts? So is this project free of any conflicts? Hopefully you will say yes to that because you've already done that. So those are the pretty standard questions for any of the projects that we have. And then we come into the name of the project. And this is where, we're trying to get somewhat more specific on these, because we have a lot of things in the database that are buffer planting on M05. And if you've had to look for a project in the database and you've come across 14 buffer projects on MO something or other, you'll know that that's really not helpful. So we want to get much more specific and about what these projects are called. So what we're looking for is what is the project? It's a buffer planting. Where is that project? It's on Millbrook, Harrington Road in Windsor. And what step is that project? So this is the implementation of that buffer planting. So it seems excessive to have all that in a name, but that's making it much easier for all of us as we go forward. So please be specific on that. You have up to 100 characters. Hopefully you won't need quite that much, but you can use that much if it makes sense to be clear on what this project is. Then we get into the project description, and what we want here is enough information to make that project understandable to the reader, right? The public is going to see this. So when they click on that drop in the Watershed Explorer, the description that comes up is whatever you enter here. So we want to make it clear what this project is. It doesn't necessarily have to say why you're doing it, but it's a buffer planting. It's on that road. It's going to cover 350 feet of Millbrook. That's the kind of information we're looking for here. excuse me, the area of floodplain that you're going to be addressing or restoring. Excuse me. I was talking all morning in another workshop, so forgive me. Hopefully you're all familiar with the different project types that are in the database. So all the sector projects, the ag projects, the dam projects, the floodplain, forestry, all of these. So what you want to make sure of is that you have the right sector and the right stage or step of that project in this, because this is obviously, as you know, this project type makes a lot of difference in where you're going for funding. So choose the project type that best describes it. And then we're going to move on into the specifics of that particular project. So when you're looking at the location, a lot of the projects, as Claire just mentioned, the ones on the Project Explorer all have specific lat longs. So if you can do that with your project, you want to click that, yes, you have a lat long for this. And it's going to bring up a map. And if you want to, if you know where your project is, wherever that happens to be, you can look at that and say, our project is here. And I should be able to click on that. And it's going to give me the lat long, and you can just pop that in. It's going to actually fill that in for you. You probably don't need 42 decimal points, but that's what it gives us. If you happen to not have a lat long and you click no on that, it's going to ask a couple of different questions. Is it a statewide project? Well, probably we don't have too many of those. And then it's going to ask you, is it in the Champlain Basin or the Connecticut River? Let's say yes there, and it's going to ask you to choose which one. If you say no there, is it a countywide? Yes. Then you're going to get, so all these drop downs are just getting more and more specific on where that location happens to be if you don't have a lat long. So it's pretty easy to follow those through. The subbasin identification is where I have, that's where we have the most trouble and finding what that is, because all these different numbers are not necessarily easy to figure out. So one way to do that is using the water quality screening tool. And when you go into that, you can put in an address. So I'm just gonna pop in one that I know of. And I'm gonna ask them to find that address. And I can come in and my project is at this site. So again, it can give me that information. And where does it come up? So I go to the project site and hit submit. And what that's going to do is find that project, but it's going to tell me right here what that subbasin is. So this is VT 1012. And when I pop back into here, all I have to do is find VT 1012 and be done. So I think that's probably the really easiest way to figure out your subbasin. The other way to do it, if you're really familiar with the atlas, is to go in and again find your project site. And as long as you put in this here, this under the watershed management layer, right at the bottom of that list is the water body ID number, and that will come up as well in orange. So there's two ways to find that out, which are fairly simple. Potential funding sources, we have a lot of them in here. So if yours is in here, just pick it. If you know this is going to be a block grant, if you know this is an AAFM project, whatever the funder, we've got grant and aids, all those general funds are in here. If you have a funding source identified already, you're going to do this project, you've got private funding to do it, you've got Eastern Brook Trout joint venture funding. There's all kinds of stuff out there that aren't, oh, that one is in here. Look at that. I didn't expect that to happen. But if your funder is not in this particular list, what do I say to do in here? Call your watershed planner. Talk to the watershed planner. We can have things added to this. We might just choose to put it in directly into the database. If it's kind of a one-time funder, you got Ben and Jerry's to pay for this project. We're gonna just type them in there and say, this is where the funding's coming from. So if it's not in here, don't freak out. Just let your watershed planner know and we can deal with it. But for the most part, we're going to say, it's a clean revolving fund grant source.
Marie, can I jump in just for a minute? We
Please.
just updated the form to add an option that you can write in a potential funding source that's not listed. So that radio button right below potential funding source would allow you to just write in a source that's not listed instead of calling your watershed planner if you prefer to do it that way. So
excellent. That's even better.
And while we're jumping in, Marie, can I jump in? By the way, I'm sorry I'm late, folks. I had a doctor's appointment, just got back. If you are looking, and you can do this when you hit the potential partners, if you hit the drop down up at the top, there's a blank space for searching, and you could type in something and it would show up. So if you typed in, let's pick a, yeah, there you go. So you get everything that starts with Connecticut.
So we're gonna,
or that even contains Connecticut anywhere in it.
That's great.
So those
Karen.
help with those big long lists. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So folks who don't know, Carol is our guru on this database creation. For potential partners, the same thing. There's lots of partners in here. Hopefully you're in here already and you can choose yourself. Otherwise, again, they've added the search key for it, and that's great that you can put in another additional partner, a new partner, which is great. Then we come to the parent-child relationship, and again, this can be confusing as well. So is this project a child of another project? And the answer is yes or no. So what we mean by that, so if a river corridor plan has been done and that assessment's done, and it has identified a specific floodplain restoration project, the river corridor plan is the parent, the floodplain restoration is the child. So we're going to say that this, whatever project I just put in here, is a child project. Yes, it is. And so we want to know what the parent project is, what it's related to. So if you go into that watershed projects database, and you need to basically find that river corridor plan, stormwater master plan, road erosion inventory. Those should be in the database as parent projects. So you can look up those numbers, stick that watershed project ID number in here, and it'll automatically link this project to it. The other way we use child parent is for the steps in one particular project. So that floodplain restoration project may start with the first child as a preliminary design project, and then that is the parent project for the final design, which is the parent project for the implementation phase. So all these projects will be linked and will be able to be tracked through our tracking databases that Claire is managing. So hopefully that's clear. If it's not, definitely just contact your planner and we can work through that and make sure we got it all right. Those assessments and those reports also prioritize the projects. So it'll be a high priority project in the stormwater master plan or a medium priority project. So we want to know what that is as well, because that certainly helps us prioritize our funding. And then what is that? So is it a culvert assessment or any of these other plans that we have and generally rank the projects from high to low. So we're just going to call this a lake watershed action plan. In any of these fields that I've already covered, we do not want to have any personally identifiable information in these. So if as you're going through and you've been talking about this project for the past 2 years and it happens to be on the Caduto parcel, you don't want to put this is the Caduto parcel in the project description, because that's not appropriate. If that's how you've referred to the project, if it's how your partners know the project, other notes is the place to put that, to make those references, to connect all the dots for people, because this is not viewable by the public. This is just for internal use. So if you have that kind of information, you want to make sure that the only place you note that is in the other notes section. If you also, as you're doing this and something comes into mind that you would like to ask the planner as they're looking through it to make an approval, put that question or that comment in this other notes section so that we'll see it and we'll be able to understand, what it is. If you have something more detailed you want us to know, put it in this section and we'll be able to we can always delete it if we answer it or get back to you on it. So that's where you want to put any of that information. That's going to bring you to the end of the entry. And what's essential is to look at this next section review, because that's going to bring up the whole form, which I haven't filled out, so it's not very clear. So please do take the time to go through each question and make sure you've got all the information in there. It's going to tell you when you didn't do something and alert you to that, say, please go back. And then all you do is come back to the new project form up here and you can edit and enter whatever it is you need to do. The final step here is to hit certify and submit, which I'm not going to do because I didn't really do this. But once you do that, it's automatically going to go to the watershed planner, right, for our approval. So make sure, please, that you have it right. You've filled out all the boxes that you need to fill out. Because if you don't and it's unclear, then funky things can happen within the database. Also, if you find out that, oh, I guess I don't really need to make this entry, this little settings icon up here, you can click that and say delete. So that's a really good thing to know. Especially if you're testing it out for the first few ones, oh, I messed that up, I should go back. Just go up and delete that draft. It's going to say, yeah, do you want to delete it? And you say yes, and it's all going to go away. Which is great because I use that all the time. Once you hit that submit, as I said, it's going to go to the planner. So what's going to happen is we get a notification, an email notification that said a new project form has been entered for your basin. And we enter this database and we have them all that we need to go in and review. So if the form is complete, you're going to also get a notification that the form is complete and has been submitted. And then it's in the planner's hands to open it up, and yes, sometimes it can take us a little while depending on what's on our plate on any given week. So, oh, look at that. See, I have all of these in my database. Actually, I don't. This is what it's gonna look like for me. I don't know if I have any new ones in here, but I could stop sharing. Nope, I'm proud of myself. I've cleared all mine. So I'm gonna stop sharing because you don't need to see all that. So, but what you do need to know is that it's going to come to the planner. If the planner has any questions or edits, or you need to tweak this, or I need more information here, the planner has two options for contacting you. There are options within the approval form that we can make notes and comments and submit those, and then you're going to get a notification that says, please go back in and fix the sub-basin because this isn't the right one. Or please add information to the description because I'm not sure which location you're talking about, those kind of things. So as long as you do that, you go back in and make your edits. You have to go to all the way to the bottom of the form and hit submit again. If it goes back, you do your thing, I go back in, I'm saying I never heard back from them on that project, and I go back in, I can't touch that entry until you have resubmitted it officially. So just be aware that you have to go to the bottom of the form, hit submit again, and then it clears it for our next level of approval. If on the first round everything's smooth, we say great, approval, we hit approve, and it goes into the database and we're done. So hopefully that's as smooth as it's going to work. So as long as the form is fine, we're going to go right in and approve it, and we'll be done with it. I don't have any to show. I should have left one in here. Because they all show up, and then up here, well, you'll see it when you do a form. There's a submission overview page, and that'll give you the submission itself, and that's where you go in and do your edits. So hopefully I should have left one in here so I could demo that, but I didn't. So hopefully that's enough. If you have any questions on any of this, go for it.
Thanks, Marie. That was awesome. There's a couple of questions in the chat. I just wanted to share also a couple of links to other resources. We have a user guide that sort of walks through more of the features and functions of the ANR online form. It's a great resource to have open while you're filling out the form. If you forget, like, what does this button do? It should be covered in the user guide. We'll also be posting, as I mentioned, a recording of this training and an FAQ document with all of the great questions that are coming in here, and we'll be updating the FAQs as we get more questions, so that will be a resource to return to as well. So all of that will be saved on this page of our website that I just included a link in the chat. Let's see, I had one other, and then the other update before we get into questions is that we're working on other forms. So the purpose of this form that we've just walked through is to add a project to the Watershed Projects database that wasn't in the database before. But we also are working on forms that will allow for updates to information of projects that are already in the database, and for closing out, basically like completing all of the reporting requirements associated with a project and marking it complete. So there will be more forms and more trainings coming up. We're working on developing those forms now and making sure that the functionality works for kind of all of the use cases. So just stay tuned. We'll be sure to notify people when those forms are available and when the trainings are happening for those forms. So I think that a couple of the questions that have come in have been answered. Thanks, Ben, for your help with that. Allison, your question, when does a project receive a new project number? So one thing, so a project that is submitted via the project form and approved by the watershed planner will basically all of that information in the form will flow to the watershed projects database as a new project entry. When you receive an email notification that your form submission has been approved by the reviewer, you can visit the watershed projects database search and search for the project name that you entered into the form to find that entry in the database. The watershed project ID numbers are automatically assigned. It's just sort of like a consecutive list based on the date of submission. So we unfortunately cannot include the watershed project ID number that's been assigned to the project as part of the notice that you receive. It's just kind of beyond the capability of this system. But the best way to find out your watershed project ID that's been assigned to the project is by searching the project name that you entered in the form, and you'll find the ID number. So the number is assigned as soon as the form is approved by the watershed planner, and that entry is added to our database. So hopefully that answers the first part of the question. A project can be entered into the database at the point that it's identified or any time after that. Ideally, if projects are being identified, we want to kind of keep the database up to date with information that's out there. So ideally that submission of new projects happens soon after projects are identified. So say, Marie's example, like a planning phase project, a river corridor plan is completed and a project or multiple projects are identified as a result of that planning project, then those all get added to the database as proposed projects. So the project can be added before a funding source is known, before anyone's committed to doing anything about it. We want to keep track of the project concepts that have come out of this planning phase work so that at the time when the funding aligns and there's a partner to do the implementation, we have that record. This is a good project to pursue. Does that answer your question, Allison? Feel free to add a follow-up. Okay, great. If you're unsure about whether or not you're at a point where the project is ready to be submitted via the form, that would be a good thing to have a conversation with the watershed planner about, to get a little bit more clarity about what level of information is needed, sort of, how much identification needs to be done in order to have a fully fleshed out project concept to submit as a proposed project. Peter, your question, what if there are numerous project types within one project, is another good one. I welcome any of the watershed planners that are on the call to chime in here. I think it sort of depends. In some cases, there may be sort of one project type that's a best fit that would be representative of the full project effort. In other cases, like if you're considering like a stormwater treatment practice and a floodplain restoration, even if those are kind of one effort in another world, those would be two different projects in our database because they're just distinct enough that we track them differently, and we want to keep those separate. But they can be, we can provide a link to show that those projects are related. Maybe they're occurring kind of on adjacent land areas, or somehow like they want to be linked up, we could do that. But if they're that distinct in terms of like different intent of projects, we would want to have two separate entries in the database. I think, let's see, the other, let's see. Just catching up on the questions. Alden asks, do we still need to identify SGA reaches for certain projects? If so, a demo of that might be helpful. I had some trouble finding those at first. I'm gonna pass that to one of the watershed planners to handle.
Well, since the form doesn't have that question, I'm going to say no. So I think especially if we have a specific lat long, I don't know if we need that. I'm not sure how that, design was made or choice was made. I think having the lat long is much more important because, as I said, a buffer planting on MO5 could be on a mile worth of river where we don't necessarily know which section of that mile is being treated. So the lat long, I think, is significantly more important.
Thanks, Marie. Catherine asks if we're working on implementing a project that is already entered into WPD as a potential project, would that be a new project that should be entered into the form? If the project is already recorded in WPD, you do not need to submit a new form entry. So that was sort of the first step that we went through before even going to the ANR online form. We ask that you check whether or not the project that you have in mind is already in our database. We want to avoid duplicative entries in the database. So the answer to that would be no. If there's already a record for the project you're working on in the database, no need to fill out the form. You can just proceed to the next, whatever your next step is.
And Claire, I'll comment on that as well. If you are doing the next step, a new form for the next step, please use the same lat long, right? So your project could be, covering 20 acres. Please just use the same lat long. So those dots on the Explorer come out in the same place. And we can know that this is one project. There's not multiple different types of projects going on in the same location.
Great point. I have another follow-up on the SGA question, and apologies if this causes any confusion. There are certain project types that trigger a conditional question about the SGA reach. I just was like, I thought we had a question in the form about the SGA reach. So it only applies to certain project types. So if you select, for example, floodplain or stream restoration implementation as the project type in the form, the next question will show, will appear as, do you know the SGA reach for this project? And we do have some instructions right in the form. So I'm going to share my screen maybe just to show this. So for this project type where an SGA reach, would be an applicable piece of information, we have a little information box about what that means and how to find the SGA reach if you don't know it. And then once you've made it through these steps using the Natural Resource Atlas and you know the SGA reach for the project, you can enter it by selecting yes and then entering the ID number. If you're still unsure, you can select no and maybe just include in the notes, like, I think this has an SGA reach, but I can't figure out what the right one is. Can you help, or something like that? And you could put that in these other notes for the planner to see and maybe help to determine what the SGA reach would be. So the form will tell you if that's a required piece of information. It just, I think, floodplain and stream restoration projects and river projects. So anything that's along a stream reach, I think would trigger that question, but some of the other project types, it doesn't apply. And Stacy says you can check with a river scientist too. Thank you, Stacy. That's a great resource as well.
I'm going to make one more comment. You're probably all familiar with the BIFs, the batch import files that we were using for project entry. if you've just gone through a stormwater master plan or something, where you have a long list of projects to enter, you can still use the batch import file. If you have more than, say, 10 projects that you want to enter all at once, you still have the option to use the batch import file, and we will accept projects that way. Sometimes it's easier when you've got 30 projects. It's sometimes easier just to send that to your planner, and we can go through it and make any changes and edits and go back and forth with you in that format. But if you're entering a few projects at once, we're asking you to use the new N form. But large projects, go ahead and you can still use the BIF.
Any other questions or clarifications on the form, or when to use it, how to use it? Anything like that? We're available if you start, filling out a form and run into an issue, feel free to reach out to me, or Carol Chamberlain is a resource for questions around how to navigate the ANR online platform, and the watershed planners for more project specific questions, and the river scientists if your project involves river work. Feel free to reach out to those folks as well. I shared some links in the chat for some resources. If anything, I would recommend bookmarking that last link that I shared in the chat. That's sort of the web page where we keep all of the resources that might be useful for grant applicants and recipients and people doing clean water work. So that's always a good place to return to if you need to locate any information or tools or resources like that. So the recording of this training will be saved on that page, as well as the FAQ. That's where you can access the user guide for the forms, and there's a link to the form itself as well. So if there are no other questions, we could end a couple minutes early. Thanks, Marie, for teaming up with me on this training, and thanks everyone for attending. We're excited to make this transition and hope that it ends up being one that's easy and streamlined for everyone to use, but definitely let us know if you run into issues or have questions. We're here to help. Okay, well, I'll stop recording, and thanks again, everybody, for joining us this afternoon, and stay tuned for upcoming trainings on the other forms.